a child trapped in a cave, a roof torn off in a midnight storm, a town frozen by fear, and a dog, abandoned, injured, forgotten, who stood in the middle of it all and refused to let anyone fall. How does a stray become a savior? How does a single bark wake an entire town? This is the story of Samson, and if you're still listening, you already know this one's going to stay with you. Subscribe for more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable. The gentle crash of waves echoed softly beneath the vast, cloudy sky, as if the ocean itself were breathing quietly. Along this lonely stretch of Oregon coastline, Samson moved slowly, paws sinking into cool, damp sand. He was a young German shepherd, barely 2 years old, with a proud stance but a weary heart. His thick black and tan coat, once glossy and well-groomed, now clung to his thin frame in matted clumps, tangled with salt and sand. Samson paused briefly, ears perked forward, eyes fixed hopefully toward distant beach, cottages glowing warmly in the evening gloom. He whimpered softly, the ache of hunger gnawing at his belly like an endless tide. Samson was not always alone. Memories flickered in his mind, brief and painful. He remembered the voice of his owner, a tall man named Jason with bright eyes and an easy laugh. Samson had loved Jason fiercely, loyally, believing with absolute certainty that this human would always return. But that day had come, and Jason never looked back. Samson had waited by the shore as instructed, watching the car vanish into the horizon, tail wagging and heart hopeful. Hours became days, then days turned into weeks. Now the beach was all Samson knew, each sunrise marking another silent day of survival. Samson moved quietly, nose low, sifting through tangled seaweed and scattered debris for scraps of forgotten food. His ribs were visible beneath his fur, and his once powerful muscles were lean, sculpted by hunger. Despite his frailty, Samson carried himself with dignity, head held high as if to defy the loneliness that pressed upon him like fog rolling from the sea. Occasionally, a human figure would pass by, bundled against the chill in thick jackets, eyes focused elsewhere, oblivious to the quiet presence, pleading silently for help. Samson learned to watch from afar, eyes full of longing but heart guarded, the sting of rejection, a familiar, lingering pain. The sky darkened as evening approached, bringing with it the cold wind that sliced through Samson's fur. Finding shelter had become routine, yet never easier. He crept toward a rocky outcrop near the dunes, where sand formed a slight hollow offering minimal protection from the biting ocean breeze. Curling tightly into himself, Samson rested his muzzle on his paws, eyes wide open, vigilant. His body shivered involuntarily, more from emptiness within than from the chill. Above him, distant laughter drifted from the warm glow of homes along the shore, a stark reminder of the companionship he longed for but could never reach. He listened carefully to the comforting yet unreachable sounds of human life. Children playing, families sharing meals, voices filled with warmth and love. Samson whimpered again softly, the sound blending into the whispers of the ocean, disappearing into the endlessness of night. As the moon rose gently above the horizon, illuminating the sand and sea in a silver glow, Samson's eyes closed heavily. In his dreams, he imagined Jason returning, smiling warmly, arms open wide in welcome, promising never to leave again. Yet every morning brought the painful reality that Jason was never coming back, and that loneliness was now Samson's constant companion. With the dawn approaching, Samson stirred, his body stiff and tired, forcing himself to rise once more, to face another day alone. His heart ached deeply, yet a flicker of stubborn hope remained, driving him forward, one paw in front of the other, toward a horizon he could not yet see clearly. He lifted his head toward the early light, eyes scanning the coastline for any sign, any glimmer of change. For Samson, even in loneliness, there was always hope that today, someone might finally notice, finally stop, and finally offer him the love he so desperately craved. The early morning sun broke gently through the coastal mist, illuminating the deserted beach, where Samson continued his lonely patrol. Waves rolled endlessly, their rhythmic whisper mixing with the distant cry of seagulls. Samson padded quietly along the shoreline, paws sinking slightly into the damp sand, his keen senses alert for any hint of food or shelter. Suddenly, his ears pricked forward sharply, catching a faint sound carried on the breeze, a weak, frightened cry barely audible over the surf. Samson froze, heart beating rapidly, his instinct awakened by the helpless tone that tugged at his very core. Turning his head toward a cluster of rocky cliffs jutting out into the ocean, Samson moved cautiously closer, his curiosity now mixed with urgency. The cry grew clearer, more distinct. It was not an animal, but a child. Without hesitation, Samson bounded toward the jagged rocks, his worn paws slipping slightly on slick stones, yet driven forward by a newfound determination. Beneath the cliffside, partially concealed by sharp-edged rocks, lay the entrance to a shallow cave, now rapidly filling with seawater from the incoming tide. Inside, pressed against the damp, cold wall, was Ethan Miller, a thin, small boy of 8, his sandy blonde hair plastered to his pale forehead. Ethan's green eyes, wide with panic, darted around frantically as water lapped at his ankles, rising steadily. He had wandered down to the cave early in the morning, exploring alone as usual, but had lost track of time and become trapped as the ocean closed off his only escape route. Now, trembling and exhausted from calling for help, Ethan could barely muster another sound. His voice was reduced to a feeble whimper. Samson paused briefly at the mouth of the cave, sensing the imminent danger, his deep amber eyes locked onto Ethan's frightened face. Without a second thought, he plunged into the rising seawater, waves crashing against his chest and shoulders. His powerful body pushed through the swirling currents with a strength he had almost forgotten he possessed. Reaching Ethan, Samson nuzzled him reassuringly, his warm breath comforting the frightened child. Ethan clung weakly to Samson's fur, desperation and relief mingling in his tear-filled eyes. Samson gently grasped Ethan's shirt sleeve with his teeth, careful not to hurt him, and guided him through the surging water, keeping the boy's head safely above the waves. The ocean seemed determined to keep them captive, but Samson fought on relentlessly, muscles straining, heart pounding. Each stroke brought them closer to the safety of the shore. Finally, exhausted yet victorious, Samson dragged Ethan onto the wet sand, carefully laying him down away from the dangerous tides. Ethan coughed, sputtering seawater as Samson circled him protectively, his body forming a warm barrier against the chill of the morning breeze. The boy's breathing gradually steadied, eyes filling with gratitude as he looked up into Samson's gentle, watchful face. The German shepherd whined softly, licking Ethan's hand to reassure him, a bond silently forming between two lost souls, now united by an incredible act of bravery. Soon, distant voices pierced the morning calm, frantic, and searching. Ethan's mother, Rachel Miller, a slender woman in her early 30s with short chestnut hair and worried eyes, emerged from the fog, calling her son's name. Rachel had been desperate, her heart consumed by fear, when Ethan didn't return home on time. Her husband had tragically passed away a year before, leaving Rachel fiercely protective of her only child. Spotting them, Rachel ran forward, breathless and overwhelmed. She swept Ethan into her arms, sobbing with relief. Samson watched quietly from a short distance, his tail gently wagging at the sight of their reunion. Rachel finally noticed Samson, her tear-filled gaze softening with understanding and immense gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand toward him. Samson hesitated briefly, but then stepped forward, pressing his muzzle into her open palm, his weary heart swelling with warmth. At that moment, on a lonely beach beneath a clear morning sky, the invisible chains of loneliness that once bound Samson began slowly to unravel. Sunlight streamed warmly through the kitchen window of the small beachside home, casting gentle patterns across the worn wooden floors, where Samson lay quietly, head resting on his paws. It had been several days since Rachel Miller had cautiously welcomed him into their modest cottage as an expression of gratitude for saving Ethan. Yet, despite his heroics, the air remained tinged with cautious distance, an invisible barrier that Rachel guarded carefully. Ethan adored Samson openly, his laughter ringing through the house whenever the gentle dog nudged him playfully or rested protectively beside him. But Rachel, still haunted by the painful memory of losing their family dog shortly after her husband's tragic death, struggled deeply with opening her heart again. Rachel, a quiet, gentle woman with expressive brown eyes and a tender smile now dimmed by grief, often found herself pausing at the sight of Samson curled in a sunlit corner, conflicted between gratitude and fear of renewed loss. Her slender figure carried a subtle tension, evident in the guarded way she moved around the German Shepherd. Even as she provided Samson food and shelter, she did so with cautious reserve, avoiding the deeper connection he silently sought. Samson sensed Rachel's hesitation, his intelligent amber eyes quietly observing her movements and demeanor. The gentle dog never pushed, instinctively understanding the subtle sadness that clung to her like a shadow. Instead, he chose patience, demonstrating his love and loyalty through quiet, consistent gestures, always respectful of her space. Each morning, as Rachel prepared breakfast, Samson would sit politely by her side, offering silent companionship without expectation. When Rachel watered the small flower garden behind their cottage, Samson would gently accompany her, content to lie nearby, eyes occasionally glancing her way, quietly reassuring her with his presence. One afternoon, as Rachel sat quietly on the porch swing, staring out toward the endless ocean, memories of happier times with her husband, Thomas, flooded her mind. Thomas had been her best friend, her rock, whose laughter once filled every room. Since his sudden death, Rachel had felt incomplete, guarded, as if embracing joy again meant betraying the love they'd shared. Lost in thought, Rachel barely noticed when Samson approached quietly, his large head cautiously resting against her knee. Surprised, she glanced down to meet his calm, reassuring gaze, filled with compassion and understanding, free of demands or expectations. For the first time, Rachel allowed herself to touch him gently, fingers slowly sinking into the warm softness of his fur. Her heart fluttered anxiously, a wave of uncertainty gripping her, yet Samson remained still, offering nothing but comfort and patience in return. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Samson's quiet determination began melting away Rachel's resistance. Small gestures became daily routines, with Samson waiting patiently for Ethan after school, ears perked attentively, tail wagging gently in greeting. Rachel found herself smiling despite her reservations, her heart softening incrementally with each day Samson showed his devotion and unconditional love. Ethan noticed the subtle changes too, often quietly encouraging his mother, his innocent eyes hopeful, voice soft and tender as he whispered, "Mom, he loves us, you know." One quiet evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, Rachel sat alone in the dimly lit living room, tears quietly slipping down her cheeks, mourning what had been lost and what she still feared to gain. Samson padded softly toward her, nudging her hand gently with his nose, his eyes deep pools of gentle empathy. Rachel drew a deep, shuddering breath, finally allowing herself to embrace the comforting presence that Samson had silently offered all along. She wrapped her arms gently around his sturdy neck, burying her face in his fur, feeling for the first time a genuine sense of peace. Samson responded with quiet warmth, sitting still and steady, patiently allowing her sorrow and fears to be released. In that tender moment, beneath the soft glow of the old living room lamp, the barriers around Rachel's heart slowly crumbled. Though Samson remained a dog without official name or title, in Rachel's eyes, he had truly become their hero, quietly healing wounds once thought impossible to mend. Dark clouds loomed ominously over the quiet coastal town, gathering strength as powerful gusts rattled windows and shook the small homes dotting the shoreline. Rachel stood anxiously by the kitchen window, eyes scanning the horizon, fingers nervously twisting her silver necklacia, treasured gift from Thomas. Ethan huddled close beside her, gripping her hand tightly, his youthful face pale with worry. Samson paced quietly, sensitive to their anxiety, his intelligent amber eyes glancing upward as distant thunder growled low and menacing. Within minutes, the storm burst forth with fierce intensity, violent winds howling as sheets of rain battered the cottage relentlessly. The wooden walls trembled under the assault, creaking with each new gust. Rachel quickly guided Ethan to the safest spot beneath the sturdy dining table, her voice calm despite the fear tightening in her chest. Samson, sensing the imminent danger, pressed close beside them, his body forming a protective barrier as the storm's fury intensified. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air, followed immediately by a terrifying roar as part of the cottage roof tore away, exposing the interior to the brutal elements outside. Cold rain poured in, drenching everything in moments. Ethan cried out, clinging desperately to his mother. Rachel shielded her son instinctively, her heart racing as pieces of debris flew through the air, narrowly missing them. Without hesitation, Samson moved swiftly, his large frame sheltering them further, absorbing blows from flying debris, enduring each impact without flinching. Another powerful blast of wind shook the house violently, and in that instant, a heavy wooden beam fell sharply from above. Samson reacted immediately, lunging upward, using every ounce of strength to intercept its deadly descent. The beam crashed heavily against Samson's side, sending him sprawling across the floor, whimpering in pain. Rachel gasped, eyes wide in shock and horror, yet there was no time to lose. Gathering Ethan quickly, she moved toward Samson, heart pounding desperately. The German shepherd lay dazed and wounded, yet bravely struggled to rise, refusing to abandon them despite his own pain. Together, Rachel and Ethan gently lifted Samson, guiding him carefully toward a safer corner away from further harm. Rachel wrapped a warm blanket around his trembling body, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face as she whispered softly to him, "You're going to be okay, Samson. You have to be." Ethan pressed close, small hands tenderly stroking Samson's head, his young voice trembling, murmuring words of comfort and love. In that terrifying moment, amidst chaos and uncertainty, it became profoundly clear to both Rachel and Ethan how deeply Samson had embedded himself into their hearts and lives. As dawn broke weakly through lingering storm clouds, neighbors and emergency services began arriving, surveying the damage and helping families in distress. Among them was Mike Jennings, a middle-aged veterinarian with kind blue eyes and a calming presence, quickly assessing Samson's injuries. He knelt beside the brave dog, gently examining his bruised ribs and wounded shoulder, his reassuring voice comforting Rachel and Ethan as he promised to care for Samson carefully. In the hours following the storm, the community rallied together, assisting Rachel in patching the roof and cleaning debris. But despite the helpful hands and comforting voices surrounding them, Rachel's heart remained anxiously focused on Samson, awaiting word from Dr. Jennings. Finally, the veterinarian returned with gentle optimism, assuring them that Samson would survive, though recovery would require rest, patience, and unwavering care. Rachel nodded gratefully, her heart flooded with relief. She knew now, more clearly than ever before, the powerful bond Samson had forged with her small family. This brave dog, who had once seemed merely a temporary visitor, had risked everything for them, proving beyond doubt his unwavering devotion. As Rachel held Ethan close, watching the injured Samson resting peacefully nearby, a quiet promise formed deep within her heart to protect and cherish Samson just as fiercely as he had protected them. Gentle rays of sunlight drifted through freshly repaired windows, illuminating the cozy living room with a soft, golden glow. Samson lay comfortably on a thick, plush bed, his healing body warmly covered by a soft blue blanket embroidered lovingly by Rachel. His eyes, once shadowed by loneliness, now shone with quiet contentment, reflecting the warmth and tenderness he'd come to know in the embrace of Ethan and Rachel. Beside him, Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, softly stroking Samson's glossy black and tan fur, occasionally whispering words of encouragement and gratitude into the dog's attentive ears. Rachel, her slender figure draped in a simple cotton sweater, moved gently through the room, smiling as she watched the bond between her son and their newfound companion deepen with each passing day. News of Samson's heroic sacrifice had quickly spread throughout the close-knit coastal town, touching the hearts of neighbors and friends who soon came forward, eager to help the family rebuild their damaged home. Men and women arrived with tools and materials, laughter mingling freely with cheerful banter, the spirit of community stronger than ever before. Among them was Bill Cooper, a friendly carpenter in his mid-50s, with weathered hands and a hearty laugh, who took the lead in repairing the roof, while others painted walls, replaced shattered windows, and planted bright flowers around the cottage, bringing fresh life to the home that Samson had bravely protected. As days became weeks, Samson steadily regained strength, his bruised ribs healing, wounds fading into thin, scars-lasting reminders of his bravery. Rachel felt her heart swell with affection and pride whenever she glanced at Samson, knowing fully the depth of loyalty he had demonstrated. In quiet moments, as Rachel sat on the porch watching Ethan and Samson chase playfully along the sandy shore, she found herself smiling again, her laughter freer than it had been in years, as if Samson had gently guided her heart back to the joy she had believed lost forever. Moved by the family's journey and Samson's unwavering devotion, the townspeople decided to hold a special celebration, honoring the dog whose courage had united them all. On a bright Saturday morning, residents gathered excitedly at the town's central park, beneath strings of twinkling lights and colorful banners fluttering gently in the sea breeze. The mayor, a kind-hearted woman named Linda Edwards, stood smiling warmly near the small stage, ready to recognize Samson's extraordinary bravery officially. With Ethan holding Samson's leash proudly, Rachel stood beside them, her eyes glistening with happy tears. Mayor Edwards stepped forward, her clear voice carrying across the gathered crowd, speaking with heartfelt admiration for Samson's loyalty, courage, and the powerful impact he had on everyone. The audience erupted in applause, eyes moist and hearts touched by the simplicity of a dog's love, so selfless and unconditional. After the ceremony, Rachel knelt beside Samson, gently placing a new collar around his neck, the metal tag engraved simply yet meaningfully, Samson Miller, a symbol of his permanent place within their family. Ethan embraced Samson, burying his face lovingly into his fur, whispering quietly, "Welcome home, Samson." The German shepherd wagged his tail slowly, eyes warm with understanding, finally belonging fully to the family who had opened their hearts to him. As the sun set softly beyond the horizon, the community lingered, sharing stories, laughter, and gratitude beneath the fading light. Rachel stood quietly with Ethan, one arm wrapped protectively around him, her other hand resting gently on Samson's head. Looking around at the familiar faces, Rachel felt deeply grateful, not only for their generosity but also for the unexpected gift Samson had brought to her family. He had shown them all the quiet strength found within patience, loyalty, and unconditional love, mending wounds both visible and invisible, forever changing their lives. Later that evening, as stars began to shimmer gently across the sky, Rachel watched Samson sleeping peacefully. Ethan nestled nearby. A tender smile touched her lips as she softly whispered to the gentle dog, "Thank you for teaching us how to trust again." And in that quiet moment, Rachel knew that the dawn Samson had brought into their lives was just the beginning of a brighter, more hopeful future. Sometimes, the greatest heroes aren't those who speak the loudest or seek recognition, but those who quietly love, sacrifice, and protect without ever asking for anything in return. Samson taught us that loyalty heals, love endures, and hope is always waiting to embrace us, even after the darkest storms. If this story touched your heart, please join our family here by subscribing, so we can continue sharing more stories of courage, kindness, and quiet miracles together.